President Biden is traveling to Lithuania to attend this highly anticipated and high-stakes NATO summit.
That's right, at a very important time in the global conversation around NATO. This trip follows a stop in the UK for a meeting with the British Prime Minister and also with King Charles.
Yeah, Mr. Biden met with the King at Windsor Castle earlier today. It's the first time the two have met since the King's coronation in May.
During his visit to London, Mr. Biden also sat down with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The two discussed the upcoming NATO summit along with the war in Ukraine.
All right, CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now, not from the White House, but from London in a beautiful park there. I've been seeing people walk behind her all day long. They're not working, you are. You saw the pageantry in London unfold earlier. So how does that prepare the ground for this next phase of the trip, which is the NATO summit?
Tony and Lily, it is great to see you. And I think that it really was the meeting at 10 Downing Street with the Prime Minister that sets the stage for what President Biden can expect to hear more of when he does attend the NATO summit, because he did, of course, make that very controversial decision to provide Ukraine with cluster munitions. Those are canisters that are filled with several tiny bombs that can be scattered across a wide area. And critics, including some members of his own party, are saying that those should never be supplied because of the risk to civilians, although Ukraine insists it will not use them in heavily populated civilian areas. And the Prime Minister has publicly spoken out against providing these sorts of weapons. And so the two certainly spoke about that, and that conversation will continue in Lithuania, where the president is headed to now for the NATO summit.
You know, Weijia, President Biden said that it would be, quote, premature to allow Ukraine to join NATO because it is in the middle of a war, and that would pull all the allies into it. How is it expected, or how are other members of NATO agreeing on this? Is there a consensus?
There is not, and so there will be another robust conversation there. But President Biden will certainly make the case that we heard him say during an interview when he was still in the U.S., pointing to Article 5 of NATO, which, of course, is that, you know, all of the members, all 31 nations, would defend any one ally that was attacked. And the president said, essentially, if we were to allow Ukraine in because they are under attack with Russia, then everyone else would be dragged into a conflict with Moscow, which is not something that is wise at this time. So he will make that case. Of course, the supporters who believe that Ukraine should join NATO do think that it will make it a lot easier for Ukraine to become a democracy, and point to the fact that if Ukraine had been a part of NATO, it would have been much harder for Russia to invade in the first place. But the president also mentioned something else, which is that you have to meet qualifications in order to join. And he said that Ukraine still has to become a democracy, a full-fledged democracy. And so that is why it's not only about the timing and about the impact on NATO, but about Ukraine itself.
So the military alliance that is NATO and also the economic alliance that is the EU, these are important organizations militarily and also for people's dollars and cents in their everyday. And there's an interesting fight going on right now between Turkey and Sweden. So the Turkish president, Erdogan, says that the EU should open the door for Turkey to become part of the EU. And in exchange for that sort of invitation, he would then approve Sweden's bid to join the military alliance. So it's like you get the economic alliance in exchange for the... Well, I really don't follow exactly who's got the power over whom here, but I know it's going to be complicated for President Biden. How is he navigating it all?
So with regard to membership into NATO, President Erdogan does have the power, because it has to be a unanimous decision by all of the members to allow anybody in. And so far, Turkey and Hungary are blocking Sweden. Hungary more so because it's following Turkey, which has concerns, it says, over Stockholm not cracking down enough on groups that it considers to be terrorists. And so this is very tricky. And in fact, the White House just issued a statement a very short time ago that, short of highlights this very delicate dance that the president has to do of diplomacy, because the president says the U.S. has always supported Turkey's bid to join the EU. And he says that is something between the EU and Turkey. At the same time, he is pushing for Sweden to become a NATO member. But it's very difficult to separate the two whenever Turkey is calling the shots on Sweden and clearly has some other interests. And so it doesn't seem, I would say, likely that this is going to be wrapped up before the NATO summit ends, which is something that the U.S. had hoped that Sweden would be allowed to become the 32nd member before this summit ended. So this is certainly a surprise move by Erdogan, a power move, and complicates things even more.
Yeah, Turkey has been a member of NATO going all the way back to 1952, but are not a part of the EU currently. Those talks have been stalled for at least since 2005, since Erdogan's reign began. Very complicated situation, a lot of high-stakes results that could follow. Weijia Jiang, thank you very much for explaining it all to us.